Have you ever wondered why silence from a woman feels heavier to a man than any words of anger could ever carry? The absence of her voice is not empty. It is a mirror that forces him to see himself without the soothing veil of her presence. In the stillness, he is confronted with the raw architecture of his own psyche, the shadows that Jung described as the hidden face of the soul. The man's mind, once comfortably clothed in her attention, now finds itself exposed, trembling under the weight of its own echo. Silence becomes a storm he cannot escape, because it arises not from her mouth but from his unconscious projections of what she might mean. The male ego, so often built upon validation, approval, and the feminine gaze, begins to fracture when denied its steady supply. He wonders, though he may not admit it, whether her silence is punishment, indifference, or something worse, transcendence. Because the truth that terrifies him most is that she may no longer need him at all. Jung spoke of anima, the feminine soul image inside every man, both muse and tormentor. When a woman withdraws her voice, she awakens his anima in its most restless form, reminding him of the vast inner emptiness he has not dared to fill. A man will tell himself many stories to guard against the abyss of her silence. He might convince himself she is childish, manipulative, cruel. He may attempt to dismiss her as irrelevant, unworthy, disposable. Yet beneath the surface, the very act of denial betrays obsession. The ego resists what the unconscious knows. Her silence has power because his identity was tied to her recognition. Without her voice, he feels unseen. And what is a man without witness? He is forced to confront his own shadow, that murky reservoir of insecurity, fear of abandonment, and unspoken longing. It is here that the paradox of attraction blooms in dark colors. A woman's absence often intensifies her presence within his mind. Each day she withholds, she becomes more myth than mortal, more symbol than flesh. He replays her gestures, her words, her laughter. He interprets meaning in every memory, desperately searching for clues as if decoding a sacred text. The masculine hunger for conquest finds itself entangled in something it cannot conquer, her refusal to engage, and so desire mutates into obsession. For what is forbidden becomes irresistible. But understand this, her silence does not only reveal him, it refines her. In detaching from the constant labor of explaining, justifying, soothing, she steps into her archetypal power. The woman who withholds words is not passive. She is embodying the deep feminine mystery that Jung described as both creative and destructive, nurturing and annihilating. She does not need to wound him with accusations. Her absence is sharper than any blade. It whispers that her life flows with or without him, and that revelation gnaws at the foundations of his fragile ego. If you, listening now, have ever wondered why a man reacts with sudden anger or desperate pursuit when you withdraw, the answer is not found in your silence alone, but in the archetype it awakens within him. Silence pulls him into confrontation with the reality that affection cannot be demanded, that respect is not owed, and that love is not a guarantee. For some men, this realization sparks humility. For others, rage. The difference lies in whether they are willing to integrate the shadow or remain enslaved by it. Consider the wisdom of the Stoics, who taught that no man is harmed by another's withdrawal, but only by his own interpretation of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Yet how many men, when faced with a woman's silence, lose all sovereignty over their mind? They spiral into fantasy, jealousy, suspicion. They imagine rivals, betrayals, ghosts. They torment themselves, not because she speaks, but because she does not. Her silence becomes the ink with which he writes his own madness. And there lies the irony. What he fears most is not her silence, but the possibility that within it she has found peace, that she has chosen serenity over struggle, self-worth over explanation. To a man whose identity depends on being the center of her world, this is unbearable, for if she no longer speaks, if she no longer reacts, then she is no longer bound to his narrative. She is free. This is why the silence of a woman can echo louder than the voice of a crowd. It awakens archetypes older than language, deeper than culture. It calls forth his shadow, exposes his dependence, tests his strength. And for the woman, it is not cruelty but clarity, a return to herself, to the still water, where she does not need to prove, to argue, to perform. Her silence is not absence. It is presence distilled into its most potent form. When the silence lingers, it grows roots inside him, It does not remain a surface irritation. It becomes a subterranean force that shakes his foundations. A man, left alone in the void created by her absence, often discovers that what he feared most was never losing her voice, but losing his reflection in it. For many men, a woman's words function like a mirror. She affirms his strength, soothes his insecurity, feeds his ego, even when she challenges him. Without that mirror, he is left staring into a darkened glass, and what stares back unsettles him. He is forced to see himself not as he imagines, but as he is. Vulnerable, incomplete, haunted by the shadow Jung insisted every man carries. This is where obsession germinates. In silence, a man hears whispers that are not really hers, but his own unconscious murmuring through the cracks. He wonders, did I fail her? Did I offend? Has she moved on? Is she with someone else? These questions are not born from her silence alone, but from the hollowness inside him. The feminine voice once filled that hollowness with warmth, conflict, or connection. Now, stripped away, he realizes the emptiness was always his to begin with. Jung called this confrontation with the self, the terrifying yet necessary meeting with one's own abyss. And so, many men will try to break the silence not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being erased, fear of irrelevance, fear of becoming invisible to the one whose gaze once granted them identity. This fear reveals a primal truth. Men are often less afraid of rejection than they are of indifference. Rejection, at least, acknowledges existence. Indifference annihilates it. The feminine withdrawal, then, is not passive. It is an act of profound psychological disruption. It dismantles the false ego and forces him into a shadow he cannot control. For the woman, this silence is not mere absence, but alchemy. It transforms the dynamic from reactive to reflective. No longer tied to his emotional turbulence, she discovers the serenity of her own center. By refusing to explain, she resists being pulled into the endless labyrinth of justification. By declining to argue, she rises above the battlefield of wounded egos. She steps into the archetype of the untouchable feminine mystery, allure, and quiet strength. If you have ever stopped speaking to a man and felt the air shift, you have witnessed this truth. His gestures grow restless, his attention sharpens, his imagination multiplies. What he could not see when you were near becomes painfully vivid when you are gone. He notices the curve of your absence more than the shape of your presence. In silence, he begins to write a story, and though he is its author, you are its haunting protagonist. The Stoics taught that freedom lies in detachment, in no longer being enslaved to another's reactions. Yet, paradoxically, silence enslaves him to his own. He becomes chained not to her voice, but to the absence of it, obsessing over meanings she has not spoken. This is the silent theater of projection. He fills her quiet with his fears, his longings, his regrets. Jung described projection as the unconscious transfer of one's own contents onto another, and here, silence becomes the perfect canvas, blank, receptive, unforgiving. It is here that attraction deepens into danger. For a man who cannot master his own inner life, her silence is unbearable. He will chase, plead, lash out, or retreat into cold detachment, all in an attempt to wrest control over the story. Yet the more he reacts, the more he betrays his lack of sovereignty. He reveals, often unwillingly, how much of his sense of self was built upon her acknowledgement. And so the feminine mystery continues its work. Her silence becomes a crucible that tests both of them, he to face his unintegrated shadow, and she to recognize her own power in not being compelled to soothe. She does not need to explain, for her silence is explanation enough. She does not need to validate, for her withdrawal reveals more than approval ever could. She has stepped into the realm of quiet authority, where the most potent statement is made without a word. In this space, a woman learns that her silence is not a void, but a presence, a declaration that she is not an accessory to his ego, but the guardian of her own soul. To stop speaking is not to disappear. It is to remind him, and herself, that her energy is sacred, her voice precious, her peace untouchable. The longer the silence endures, the more it unsettles his carefully constructed defenses. What begins as irritation grows into a gnawing unease, and soon that unease ripens into obsession. He starts to wonder not just what she is doing, but who she is when she is not tethered to him. The masculine psyche, often conditioned to believe it is the center of the narrative, now confronts a story where it is no longer the main character. In this void, he begins to fantasize, fear, and fabricate. He imagines her thriving, radiant, untouched by his absence, and that vision torments him more than any words she might have spoken. Jung wrote of the shadow as the hidden dimension of the psyche, the part that contains all that a man rejects about himself. When she withdraws her voice, she inadvertently summons his shadow to the surface. The doubts he concealed under bravado, the wounds hidden beneath achievement, the insecurities masked by pride, these rise like smoke in a room with no escape. He becomes a prisoner of his own suppressed truths. Silence does not merely irritate him, it reveals him. A man may attempt to reclaim control through noise, angry words, accusations, pleas, or sudden declarations of indifference. Yet the more he speaks, the more obvious it becomes that he is speaking not to her, but to the echo of his own fear. He is not battling her silence, he is battling himself. That is why silence holds such dangerous power. It transforms the battlefield from external to internal, from her actions to his unconscious. For the woman, this silence is not a tactic of cruelty, but a return to sovereignty. In a world where women are often told to over-explain, over-apologize, and over-perform emotional labor, silence becomes rebellion. It says, I will not justify my worth through endless dialogue. I will not lend my voice to soothe what he must face within himself. Her quietness becomes an act of individuation, the Jungian process of becoming whole, separating the authentic self from the masks imposed by others. If you are listening now and have ever withdrawn your words, you may have felt the strange reversal of power it creates. Suddenly the one who once demanded explanations becomes the one who cannot rest without them. The one who sought to dominate the narrative becomes enslaved by the lack of it. Silence teaches what words never could. That energy is more potent than argument, and presence more commanding than persuasion. Consider the wisdom of Seneca, who reminded us that true strength lies in self-possession. The woman who chooses silence is not surrendering. She is reclaiming her energy from the endless cycle of defense and reaction. Her silence does not ask for permission, nor does it beg for recognition. It simply exists, vast and undeniable, forcing him to encounter himself without distraction. And in that encounter, something primal awakens. Desire intensifies in absence. Men are often captivated not by what they understand, but by what they cannot grasp. A woman's silence shrouds her in mystery, and mystery is the essence of attraction. He longs to decode her quietness, to penetrate the veil of her stillness, but the harder he tries, the further it eludes him. Her silence becomes an unspoken riddle that he cannot solve, and so he circles it endlessly, bound by fascination. Yet silence does not only reveal his longing, it exposes his fragility. The man who has not confronted his own wounds will find silence unbearable, because it denies him the constant reassurance he craves. He will interpret her withdrawal as abandonment, rejection, even betrayal, when in truth it is a mirror of his own lack of self-sufficiency. The mature man learns to sit with silence, to face the discomfort, to integrate the shadow it exposes. The immature one lashes out, demanding the woman break the silence so he may escape his own reflection. This is the secret weight of silence. It is not an absence, but an invitation. An invitation for him to face the emptiness he has avoided. An invitation for her to reclaim the parts of herself she lost in overgiving. It is a liminal space where obsession, attraction, ego, and soul collide. And though it can destroy illusions, it can also create transformation for both. In the end, her silence is not a wall but a threshold. Whether he crosses it into deeper understanding, or flees from it into further denial, depends not on her but on the courage he brings to the shadows. And for her, silence is the reminder that she is never defined by his response, only by her own clarity. The silence becomes a labyrinth, and the man wanders inside it with no map. Each corridor he turns into is not her creation, but his own projection. One moment he believes she is punishing him, the next he is certain she is indifferent. And then, just as quickly, he fears she has already replaced him. The silence does not speak, yet in his mind it shouts, and every echo is his own fear magnified. He discovers how deeply dependent he has been on her voice, not for love, but for orientation, for the reassurance that he exists within her world. Without that compass, he drifts, and in drifting, he encounters the storm of his own psyche. Jung taught that when the anima, the feminine image within the man, is denied or ignored, it turns chaotic, haunting him in the form of obsession, fantasy, or despair. Her silence awakens this anima in its most unruly shape. Suddenly, he is confronted by the truth that his sense of wholeness was never rooted in himself, but borrowed from her presence. What was once comfortable companionship now transforms into a painful unveiling. Without her, he is unfinished, fractured, a man estranged from his own soul. In this unraveling, many men grow reckless. Some will attempt to provoke her into breaking her silence with anger or accusations. Others will try seduction, begging, or displays of false indifference. But all of these are strategies of the ego, desperate efforts to avoid the abyss that silence has opened. They are not about her at all. They are about escaping himself. And that is why, paradoxically, the more he reacts, the deeper he falls under her spell. For her silence is not an action he can outmaneuver. It is an energy he must endure. For the woman, this silence is both shield and sanctuary. It allows her to step outside the exhausting rhythm of justification and reaction. No longer is she bound to explain the unexplainable, to soothe the insecurities that are not hers to heal. She learns that silence itself is an act of dignity, a declaration that her energy is too sacred to be squandered in endless explanations. In silence, she returns to the deep well of her own being, where her worth is not dependent on how he perceives her, but on how she perceives herself. And here, something extraordinary happens. As he spirals into obsession, she rises into clarity. As his mind floods with noise, her soul grows quiet with power. This reversal is not accidental. It is archetypal. The feminine mystery has always unsettled the masculine psyche because it points to what cannot be conquered, what cannot be owned. Silence embodies this mystery. It is the veil he cannot lift, the riddle he cannot solve, the ocean he cannot drain. To the man who has not confronted his shadow, this silence is unbearable. To the man who dares to confront it, it becomes initiation. He learns, through her withdrawal, that dependence on another for identity is a form of slavery. He discovers that his anger, his jealousy, his suspicion, all are voices of his own unintegrated fears. If he is wise, he begins the work of individuation, reclaiming his own soul, rather than seeking it in her validation. If he is foolish, he will lash out, forever running from himself, forever chasing women who mirror his emptiness back to him. To you, the woman listening, understand this. Your silence is not weakness. It is not avoidance. It is the unspoken language of self-respect. It does not mean you do not care. It means you care more for your peace than for performing explanations that fall on deaf ears. Your silence is a boundary drawn in invisible ink, and though he may rage against it, it teaches him what no argument could, that your energy is not his to consume without reverence. And to the man, though he may never admit it, her silence is unforgettable. Long after her words would have faded, long after apologies or quarrels would have dissolved, it is her silence that lingers, echoing in his memory. Because silence is not the absence of connection, it is the unveiling of truth. It tells him, without telling, that her world continues, her soul endures, and her worth shines regardless of his recognition. And that revelation, more than rejection, pierces the core of his being. There comes a point where the silence ceases to be a moment and becomes a presence in its own right. It lingers in his thoughts like incense that will not fade, staining everything with its aroma. He wakes with it, carries it through his days, and dreams with it at night. Silence becomes the unseen rival, the shadow companion he cannot escape. It follows him more faithfully than she ever did, because it was never hers to begin with, it was always his, reflected back from the depths he never dared to explore. In this haunting, regret begins to crystallize. A man remembers the words he spoke too harshly, the moments he dismissed her presence, the times he demanded instead of cherished. Silence, unlike speech, offers no chance to correct. It grants no comfort of dialogue, no possibility of immediate repair. It is final, like stone, and in that finality, he comes face to face with the weight of his own choices. Jung described individuation as the process of integrating the disowned parts of the self. Here, silence forces that integration by showing him what he lost not because she left, but because he failed to see. And yet, paradoxically, silence is not only punishment, it is medicine. It is bitter, yes, but it is also purifying. For only in the absence of her voice can he begin to hear his own. Only without her constant reflection can he perceive the emptiness he must fill from within. In this way, her silence is a teacher, though he may curse it. It instructs him in humility, in patience, in the truth that no woman exists solely to rescue a man from himself. For the woman, the silence stretches like a horizon of freedom. What once felt like withholding now feels like release. She is no longer entangled in the endless cycles of his need. She is no longer caught in the exhausting dance of giving and proving. In silence, she reclaims her autonomy, her soul's clarity, her feminine power that does not need to explain itself. Her stillness is not emptiness. It is fullness, overflowing with the quiet radiance of self-worth. She learns that detachment is not coldness, but the warmth of belonging first to oneself. To the man who listens with new ears, silence becomes initiation. It invites him to confront the shadow, to reconcile with his anima, to grow into a wholeness that does not depend on another's voice. He may emerge humbler, wiser, more capable of love that is not consumption but communion. Or he may resist, clinging to pride, sinking deeper into obsession. Silence offers no guarantee, it only offers truth. For you who hear these words, recognize the alchemy at work. Silence is not absence, it is transformation. It reveals what is hidden, it destroys what is false, it refines what is real. It strips away the noise of ego and exposes the soul's raw contours. To endure silence is to endure the fire of self-revelation. To wield silence is to step into the ancient power of the feminine, the mystery that cannot be explained but only experienced. And so, the secret thoughts of a man when a woman stops speaking are not about her at all. They are about the battle within himself, the clash between ego and shadow, desire and fear, possession and release. He may imagine he is fighting her silence, but in truth he is confronting his own. The woman who understands this no longer fears withdrawal. She no longer dreads the consequences of holding her peace. She knows her worth does not diminish in quiet. It expands. She knows her absence does not make her powerless. It makes her unforgettable. She learns that the deepest power is not in the words that bind, but in the silence that liberates. And in that liberation, she becomes untouchable. Not because she withholds love, but because she no longer trades her peace for validation. Her silence is not a void. It is the sound of her soul returning to itself, unbroken, unbent, and free. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.